It's time for a debrief. We are going to talk about, in this very last episode of The Diaries, writing the fourth book of a trilogy of a fantasy romance series, we're going to talk about how it all went. Hi, my name's Leanne Shawler. I'm an artist and a writer, and today, I just already said what we're talking about. It's going to be a debrief of how writing book 4 in a series went, because I've never written a series before, and I was actually quite worried about trying to get this last book written and wrap everything up. And that was a full ink bottle when I started book 1, and that's how much ink is left. I have notes. So let's start with first, there is a playlist of all the Diaries. I will link to that below. You can find it also on my channel. So hopefully, if you've missed the beginning, you can go back. I'm going to refer to a couple of these throughout. But if you've been here from the beginning, you've probably forgotten half of what I've said, because I knew I forgot half of what I said. So let's have a look at how it all went. First, let's do some statistics. From plotting to the final edits, it took me 7 months approximately. The video for plotting went live in July, but I did the plotting in June. 7 months is fast for me. I would say normally I'm a 9-month type person, and this was also the longest book in the series. This was 113,804 words. That's a lot. Did I write down what the next nearest was? I think Sword for Wellington just barely cracked 100, but I just wanted to do some general reflecting. I wrote some questions for myself. First one I'm going to ask is, what are you grateful for? I'm grateful this turned out so well. This is a cracker of a book. It was a joy to write, even if I rewrote a few scenes thinking that I hadn't written them yet, and I had, but a joy to write, that first draft especially. I'm grateful I didn't have to rewrite half the book. I had to do that for book 2, A River Trembles. I got about halfway through and I'm like, yeah, I don't believe this. I do not believe that these two people are actually attracted to each other. So I think at that point I added the subplot for Emery's and Rhiannon, two minor characters that became major characters. So there would be a romance in my fantasy romance. Otherwise, it was just going to be sheer fantasy and figuring out all the things that Idithea needed to figure out in book 2. I'm trying not to spoil anything in this video. We'll see how I get on. And yes, those are the cicadas. It is hot. So I'm glad I only had to refine book 4, mainly trimming down those duplicate scenes and doing some expanding, especially at the ending. But other than that, I think at the end of the first round of edits, it came in at 110,000 and we finished at 113. So, or was it 112? I think it was 112. So I think we got up 1,000 words. What was the most surprising thing about writing book 4? The most surprising thing was doing this, vlogging. I thought it would be just a fun way to get the word out about my series and what I'm doing. But what it actually turned into was an accountability thing. I had to show each week, although I think I began out with every other week. I started slow. But now I have to show each week what I've been up to. I do film in advance, so this is coming out in March, and I'm filming this at the very end of January. So to have to sit on this news turns out to be impossible. Substack knows where my publication is hosted. They all know, but here. Surprise! Book's finished. The biggest challenges? Primarily structure. If you remember the multiple storylines, multiple timelines, all converging together, that was huge. From the beginning, I really struggled with how to structure this book in two different aspects. The first aspect was just the multiple points of view. The most points of view I think I've had up until now have been 3. So we had Ida, or maybe 4. 4. No, 3. No, 4. 4. The last book was 4. So we had, did we? It was 3 or 4. So we've had Ida Thea's diary. We've had the interviews with a prophet, Lear's point of view. And then we delved into Jasper a little bit in book 2. I don't think he appears at all in book 3. And then there was the novel, A Sword for Wellington, that the daughter of the 2 main characters of that book wrote. And now I have 7 viewpoints. So I had to bring all those stories into the same timeline, because then towards the end of the book, which I guess would technically be Act 3, except I don't plot Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. I just unconsciously, I guess, do it. At Act 3, the end of the book, there were a couple of hinge points where all the characters needed to know what was going on. And so I had to, when I wrote the first draft, I didn't care about any of that stuff. I said, I'll figure that out in the edits. I'll figure that out in the edits. It'll be fine. It was not fine. You know it was not fine. I showed myself at my worst in that video, like sweating because it was a hot day, the whole bit. So it was not a pleasant experience for you to watch or for me to do. So there were these hinge points and I needed to get everybody there. And that took some finagling of dates, because I did want that last event to happen on a certain date. So I backdated to the second hinge point and then backdated to the first hinge point and then figured out where everybody was going from there. I did not account for one of the characters needing a little more time. If you remember, I found a folder that had been closed up with scenes in it that I needed to figure out how to squeeze in. And again, in the second round of edits, I also found that I was off a few days on a few things, but fortunately that did not impact the other storyline. So that was fine and good. Second thing was how I'm structuring this for publication, because this is a serial and it's not a novel per se. It is weekly chapters or weekly installments set out. In most cases, I think there's one scene that does not end on a cliffhanger, but I couldn't get it to end any other way without going into another 1,000 words. So I decided on the shorter side would be better. So they need to end in a cliffhanger so that my readers will like go, oh, the next one's out. Remember what happened last time? I really need to get in and find out what happened. Assuming I don't switch viewpoints, of course, because I might do that on you. So that's a different structure to a novel where it's a book and you pick it up and you read it. And you might read a few 3 or 4 chapters in a go, where this time it's like 1 chapter at a time, unless you're binge reading it. So there are questions there regarding how to structure that out, because we have multiple timelines. And what if you don't want to read about Ida Thea? I mean, she's the main character, but what if you don't want to read about her? Or you're not invested yet in the new character, and like you might want to skip over that and get on with ones that you know well. So I had this thought, and I thought very seriously about doing this, is that each week, because it's like a newsletter type format, you could get this in your email. I thought you can sign up for the main novel, and then there would be strands that you could sign up individually for per character. So basically per point of view that I have in this, except maybe the bad guy. I probably would put him in somebody else. But per point of view, and then whenever they're mentioned in, like, for example, Lunid meets Ida Thea for the first time, well, you would get that. The people who signed up for Ida Thea would get that, and the people who signed up for Lunid would get that. But I couldn't figure that out to how that would resolve in the case of if you've signed up for multiple characters, if you signed up for all of them, and we've hit the hinge point, do you get 5 emails? Even if I constricted that down to the main one, like there is overlap here. it's still clunky because you would get the Lunid one and the everybody else one. So ultimately, I decided not to do that. I may decide once the series is finished is to put out indexes. Here's Ida Thea's entries. Here's Lunid's entries. Here's da 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 da. Here's Sir Hugh's entries. All of those things, and then you can like read the story from that single source point of view. I think that would be kind of fun, but I don't think it would be that fun to read because you miss huge swathes of the story. And there is one point where Sir Hugh, being Sir Hugh, if you're up to date with the Sword for Wellington, you know the man likes his facts. He's a bit of an intelligence agent, needs to, He sits everybody down and says, like, right, what have you all been up to? So I tried not to make that as you know, Bob, but like, oh no, I didn't know that. So all these things that these characters didn't know about each other was kind of a fun scene to write. So I have decided just to stick with a simple, as if it was going to be a novel. So it will begins with a completely separate story, but it will begin with a scene set towards the end of the series of events in 1819, and then it will flash back to 1816 as it happens, and you get to hear the story, because that was the other thing. Because my other biggest challenge was, how do I deal with the gap between 1815, September of, and 1819? How do I deal with this gap? Now, book 2, As River Trembles, happened because I needed to know what happened between the end of A Grail for Ida Thea and the beginning of A Sword for Wellington. This really was intended to be a trilogy. And because what happened to Ida Thea, like growing into her role, it became very much something that I needed to share with everybody. So book 2 became an actual book 2, not just for my own edification, but because I could foresee there would be a number of, well, as you know, Bob, while we were in Care Morgana, da 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 da. No, you get to experience it for yourself. And so I wrote some stuff between 1816 and 1819, because I'm like, I knew these events happened. I knew something would happen to Gwen. I knew something would happen to spoiler, and the new ordinary world at the beginning of book 4 would completely go to crap. It does. It completely goes to crap. I realized that because it was ordinary world to do the the hero's journey to begin with, that I needed to show ordinary world, because we leave things off in an interesting place romance-wise at the end of A Sword for Wellington, just so you know. Needed to know what that looked like, and then the consequences of choices, decisions, the romance, everything kind of needed to be shown. We kind of needed to see Ida Thea's transformation, the consequences of her decisions particularly. So it all ended up in the book. Let's talk creative choices. There was a creative choice, and it actually came out at the character herself. Her role, Ida Thea's role, greatly changes from where we leave her as, spoiler, at the end of book 3, surrounded by her people, by her chosen court. And it all shifts in book 4. As I said, it goes to crap, and she undergoes a profound transformation. And I have complained about through the series how Ida Thea's voice just disappears. She writes herself out of the narrative. And that was also a creative choice on my part, because it could be an entire whole book on what she's now, her new invitation, what she's now called to do, with regards to the gifted, to her fellow Dragaimor, and how to, basically save them. And it is very much embedded in the Luddites' revolts against, the Industrial Revolution. Brian Merchant's Blood in the Machine was actually kind of instrumental in me thinking through what that would look like. And so she stops writing about it because, that's really not my expertise. Even if I imagine it, I will probably imagine it badly. And honestly, we're talking like 3 years worth of stuff, which could be 3 whole novels in themselves. Potentially heartbreaking, cyclical, 1 step forward, 2 steps back, difficult to read, especially in this time. And I don't have that wisdom to impart. It's not a book I can write. I wish I could, but I will leave that to someone who's more experienced to write about that kind of struggle. Brian Merchant, for example, in a non-fiction way. I don't know of any other authors. If you know of an author who writes about that kind of grinding, slow arc of justice thing where it doesn't actually quite work out, because it didn't work out for the Luddites, did it? Put that in the description below. If you write that stuff, let me know, because I think I want to read it. But I couldn't figure out how to write it without bogging it down, without making it preachy and didactic and generally helpless or hopeless. So what I ended up doing was showing Ida Thea after a year of doing this and the toll it takes on her. And that's all I'm going to say about that. But that was a creative choice to do that, and not, unlike books 2 and 3, stick with the characters through the entire story arc. Well, my next question is, how is it different writing book 4 than, let's say, other books in the series? This vlogging was different, and I've already talked about that. The other thing that was different was that instead of just like writing on an afternoon, I wouldn't say there was a huge amount of focus. There were times where I would sort of, like, as you guys say, lock in, work on a concentrated period of time on the previous 3 books. But this one there was at least one big intensive session that changed the way that I wrote. So I start handwriting, then I transcribe it in, and then we do a first round of edits and a second round of edits. The difference in this time came with the handwriting, the zero draft, the first draft stuff, because I went on that writing residency at Nobby's Lighthouse and spent 5 days working about 6 hours a day, if not more, working on book 4. And the stuff just poured out of me. Like, I would walk in on a lunch break and go, I don't know what just happened, but it was really cool. There were struggles. Like, it wasn't like, there were times where I would just like sit and stare at the window because there were whales, humpback whales off the coast. But on the whole, it was just with this outpouring. And when I came back down from the lighthouse and back home, I'm like, well, I want to keep this somehow. And so instead of writing once a day, I started writing twice a day for like 30 minutes to an hour in the morning, if not more. And then the solid chunk of time of 1 to 2 hours in the afternoon. And that kept, I think, the story uppermost in mind and continued to flow. And so that was, I think, the major way how I wrote this book was different to previous books. I'm going to go to Past Me and talk about next steps. I have to go make the props now, you realize. I have to give all the chapters titles. I have to do previously on, which is more complicated now that we have multiple timelines going, and I suspect that might be getting a bit lengthy, but I'll figure that out. They're not too difficult to write. I'm going to leave that for another week, I think. There will be one future edit, but that happens as I schedule the posts. I always find typos. Sometimes even after I post. But I'm not too worried about that. That's just minor stuff. Things now get a little interesting because now I don't have the end diaries here on my channel, so I'm going to have to come up with something else. Chatty vlogs seem to be appreciated, so I'll keep those going, and I'm doing like little one-off thingies as well. So yes, and of course I'm going to take you along on the prop making, some of it anyway. Camera angles are terrible for prop making. And I might talk a little bit more about what's going on with the last book in the trilogy. And of course, there's the novella I'm working on, so we can talk about that a bit more too. I had 2 more chapters to edit for that. I'll take care of that this week. So I think I'm going to wrap up here. I've been talking for 24 minutes, and I know there are edits in that, but still. If I didn't mention this, past me didn't mention this, I am planning to vlog the next book. I have to choose which one it is, whether it's going to be the Arthurian prequel, which is very likely, or the Korean Shilla dynasty fantasy romance, which I'm going to Korea this year to do a little more research in person at Gyeongju. So yeah, so those are my 2 choices, but I don't plan to start writing until I finish making the props and we launch book 4 on June 13th, if that's a Saturday. If I got that date wrong, I'll put the right one here, and that'll be when book 4 begins. The last book, the 4th book, and the last book in the Mordregai Chronicles trilogy. So that's it. I'm a bit sad about it being the end of the End Diaries, but there are more vlogs to come, and there will be like more little writing tippy type things. Usually it reflects where I'm at in the writing process, and you'll be getting some prop making videos, and eventually we'll do a tour of Ida Thea's dollhouse if I ever get it finished. I just have the exterior and some tweaks in 1 or 2 rooms. So that's, you can look forward to coming to that. So if that sounds intriguing and if you've been enjoying it so far, please, if you haven't already, subscribe. There's a button just down there somewhere. And if you're interested in reading, you can head over to projectstarfish.substack.com and you can read it there for free without giving me your email, or you can sign up and get the latest installments in your inbox. Subscribers will be the only people who will be able to access the PDF or the EPUB once I figure out how to do that. That's my goal. So it won't be publicly accessible on the website, so you will have to subscribe in order to get that. Like this video if you haven't liked it already, and if you got to the end of this video, we celebrated last week and probably the week before with the edits. So let's do something different with our comments today. Tell me which you'd rather see, an Arthurian prequel involving sea dragons, or a Korean Shilla dynasty fantasy romance which may or may not involve sea dragons. I'm still very airy-fairy. Let me know in the comments below which you'd prefer to see next. There's also the potential of a sequel involving the kids. I think I mentioned that in the video where I was talking about the ending of the video. I'm talking about the ending of the series. So that's also an option. Let me know. I've named all the characters except maybe 1 because I'm still trying to decide whether or not how many kids that person's going to have. I don't know. Thanks for watching, and I will see you here on this channel hopefully next week. Talk to you soon. Bye!